Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he checked his scanner one more time. The hot sun of Kepler 438 beat down on his back through his worksuit. He had been walking for 3 hours now, looking for new mineral deposits in the rocky canyons outside the colony. This was his job as a geological surveyor, and he liked it most days. The quiet helped him think, and he enjoyed being alone in the vast landscape. The mining colony where Jake lived was small, with only about 200 people. Most of them worked in the main mining facility, pulling valuable metals from the ground to send back to Earth. Jake's job was different. He walked around the planet's surface, using his scanner to find new places to dig. It was lonely work, but Jake preferred it that way. He had always been better with rocks and machines than with people. As he walked along the edge of a deep canyon, his scanner began beeping in a strange pattern. Jake stopped and looked at the small screen. The readings were odd. His scanner was picking up metal, but not the kind they usually found on this planet. The metal signatures were too complex, too organized. Jake frowned and adjusted his scanner settings. The beeping got stronger. Jake followed the beeping sound down into the canyon. The walls were red and orange, carved by wind and time. His boots crunched on the loose rocks as he made his way carefully down the steep path. The beeping grew louder with each step. Whatever was down there, it was big. When Jake reached the bottom of the canyon, he saw something that made him stop, breathing for a moment. Half buried in the sand and rocks was a ship, but it was not like any ship Jake had ever seen before. The hull was smooth and curved, like it had been grown rather than built. Strange panels along its sides flickered with a weak blue light. The ship was about the size of a small house, but it looked broken and damaged. Jake approached the ship slowly. His heart was beating fast. In all his years on the colony, they had never seen any sign of alien life. The ship's design was beautiful in a way that human ships never were. It looked almost alive, with flowing lines and surfaces that seemed to shift color in the light. There was a hole in the side of the ship, probably from whatever had caused it to crash. Jake could see inside, where more of the blue lights flickered. Weakly, he pulled out his flashlight and shined it through the opening. The inside of the ship was just as strange as the outside. The walls were covered with what looked like living circuits, pulsing with soft light. Jake climbed carefully through the hole. The air inside smelled sweet, like flowers after rain. His flashlight beam moved across the strange interior until it fell on something that made him gasp. There, lying on what might have been a pilot's seat, was a person, but not a human person. The being was tall and thin, with skin that seemed to shimmer like oil on water. Her face was narrow and elegant, with large eyes that were closed. Her hair was long and silver, floating around her head like she was underwater. She wore a suit that seemed to be made of the same material as the ship, flowing and organic. Jake could see that she was badly hurt. Silver blue liquid, probably her blood, had pooled around her left arm, which was bent at an odd angle. Her breathing was shallow and uneven. One of her legs was trapped under a piece of the ship's interior that had broken loose in the crash. For a moment, Jake just stood there staring. His mind was racing. This was first contact with an alien species. He should report it immediately to the colony authorities. They would want to know about this right away. The military would be called. Scientists would come from Earth. This was the most important discovery in human history, but as Jake looked at the injured alien, another thought pushed its way into his mind. She was hurt and alone. She needed help right now, not in a few hours, when the authorities could organize a response team. Jake had basic medical training like all colonists. He could help her. Jake made his decision quickly. He turned off his communicator so the colony could not track his location. Then he carefully moved the broken piece of ship off the alien's leg. She moaned softly but did not wake up. Jake gently checked her injuries. Her arm was definitely broken, and she had several deep cuts that were still bleeding the silver blue. Fluid. Jake knew he could not treat her properly in the crashed ship. He would need to move her to his research station, which was about a mile away. The station had better medical supplies and equipment. It was also isolated, which would give him time to figure out what to do next. Very carefully, Jake lifted the alien woman in his arms. She was lighter than he expected, and her skin felt warm through her strange suit. Her head fell back, and Jake could see that her face was peaceful despite her injuries. She looked young, though Jake had no idea how to judge the age of an alien. The walk back to his research station was the longest mile of Jake's life. He had to stop several times to rest, being careful not to jostle the injured alien too much. His scanner and other equipment felt heavy on his back, but he did not want to leave anything behind that might be found by others. Jake's research station was a small building made of prefabricated sections. It had a main room with his equipment, a small sleeping area, and a basic medical bay that was meant for treating minor injuries. Jake had never imagined he would use it to treat an alien. He laid the alien woman carefully on the medical table and began to work. First, he cleaned her wounds with antiseptic. The silver-blue blood seemed to respond well to human medical treatments. He set her broken arm as best he could, using splints and bandages from his medical kit. Throughout the process, she remained unconscious, though she sometimes made soft sounds that might have been words in her language. Jake worked for hours, doing everything he could think of to help her. He gave her water through a small tube, hoping her body could process it. He covered her with a thermal blanket to keep her warm. He set up a monitor to track her vital signs, though he was not sure if the readings meant anything for an alien. When Jake finally finished, he sat down heavily in a chair beside the medical table. The alien woman's breathing seemed more steady now, and her skin had lost the pale gray color it had when he found her. Jake hoped these were good signs. As he watched her sleep, Jake thought about what he had done. He had made a choice that could be seen as treason by the human authorities. Instead of reporting the discovery immediately, he had chosen to help an injured being. He did not know if she was friendly or hostile. He did not know if more of her kind were coming. All he knew was that she had been hurt and alone, and he could not leave her that way. Jake looked out the window of his station at the vast landscape of Kepler 438b. Somewhere out there was the crash ship, and somewhere beyond that was the colony where people were probably starting to wonder why he had not checked in. But for now, in this small room, there was just him and an injured alien who needed his help. He settled back in his chair to wait for her to wake up. When she did, Jake hoped he would be ready for whatever came next. Jake woke up in his chair with a stiff neck and aching back. The morning light of Kepler 438b was streaming through the small window of his research station. He had fallen asleep watching over the alien woman, and now he quickly looked at the medical table to check on her. She was still there, still breathing, but something had changed. Her large eyes were open, and they were a bright red color that seemed to glow in the dim light. Jake had never seen eyes like that before. They were beautiful but frightening at the same time. The alien woman was staring at him with what Jake could only describe as pure terror. Jake slowly stood up, being careful not to make any sudden movements. The alien woman tried to sit up quickly, but pain shot through her broken arm and she cried out. The sound was musical, like a bird singing, but filled with fear and hurt. She said something in a language that sounded like flowing water mixed with wind chimes. Jake did not understand the words, but he could hear the panic in her voice. The alien woman looked around the small medical bay with wide red eyes. She saw the machines monitoring her vital signs, the bandages on her arm, the foretube giving her water. Her breathing became fast and shallow. She was clearly afraid and confused about where she was and what had happened to her. Jake held up his hands to show he was not holding any weapons. He spoke in a soft, calm voice. "It's okay, you're safe here. I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Jake. I found you in your ship after it crashed. You were hurt, so I brought you here to help you." The alien woman tilted her head slightly, and Jake wondered if she could understand any of what he was saying. Her red eyes studied his face carefully. She said something else in her musical language, and this time Jake thought he heard a question in her tone. Jake pointed to himself. "Jake," he said clearly. Then he pointed to her and raised his eyebrows in a questioning look. The alien woman was quiet for a long moment. Her red eyes were still fixed on Jake's face, but they seemed less bright now, less afraid. She was studying him like she was trying to figure out what kind of creature he was. Slowly, very slowly, she raised her good hand and pointed to herself. Lyra, she said. Her voice was soft and had a musical quality even when she spoke in English. The word came out with a slight accent that made it sound like singing. Jake smiled and nodded. Lyra, that's a beautiful name. He was surprised and relieved that she could speak some English. It would make things much easier. Lyra looked down at her bandaged arm and then back at Jake. She said something in her own language again, but this time she also tried to speak in English. You help me? The words were careful and uncertain. Yes, Jake said, nodding. I helped you. Your ship crashed in the canyon. You were hurt badly. I brought you here and fixed your arm as best I could. Lyra's eyes changed color slowly, from bright red to a softer orange, then to yellow. Jake wondered if the color changes showed her emotions. She seemed less afraid now, but still very cautious. Where Dar is here? Lyra asked in her careful English. This is my research station, Jake explained. I work alone out here, looking for minerals. The human colony is about 20 miles away, but they don't know you're here. At the mention of the human colony, Lyra's eyes flashed red again. She tried to sit up despite the pain, looking around like she was planning to escape. Humans, she said. And there was fear in her voice again. Jake realized that Lyra was afraid of humans in general, not just confused about her situation. You don't need to be afraid of me, he said gently. I'm not going to hurt you or turn you over to anyone. I just want to help you get better. Lyra stared at him for a long moment. Her eyes shifted from red to orange to yellow again. Why? She asked. Why help me? Humans and Zilani are enemies. So that was what her people were called, Zilani. Jake filed that information away. Maybe our governments are enemies, he said, but that doesn't mean we have to be. You were hurt and alone. I couldn't just leave you there. Lyra's eyes continued to change colors as she thought about this. Jake watched, fascinated by the display of emotion through color. He was beginning to understand that red meant fear or anger, while yellow seemed to be curiosity or caution. You are different, Lyra said after a while. Different from what we were told about humans. What were you told about humans? Jake asked. Lyra was quiet for a moment, like she was deciding whether to trust him with the information. We were told humans are violent, that they destroy everything they touch, that they cannot be trusted or reasoned with. Jake felt a pang of sadness at hearing this. And what were humans told about the Zilani? I do not know, Lyra said. What were you told? That your people are cold and calculating, that you want to take over human space and destroy our colonies, that you see us as inferior and want to wipe us out. Lyra's eyes turned a deep blue, color that Jake had not seen before. Both sides have been told lies, she said quietly. Jake nodded. It seems that way. But you're here and I'm here and we're talking instead of fighting. Maybe that's a start? Over the next few hours, Jake. And Lyra talked more. Jake learned that Lyra was a scout for something called the Zilani Collective. She had been sent to observe human activities in this system, but her ship had been attacked while she was returning to report her findings. Who attacked you? Jake asked. Lyra's eyes turned dark purple, which Jake was starting to recognize as a color of great concern or fear. The Korthek, she said. They are how do you say the real enemy? Jake had never heard of the Korthek before. Tell me about. Lyra struggled to find the right words in English. They are destroyers. They consume everything. They have been making humans and Zilani fight each other while they prepare to destroy both of us. This was shocking news to Jake. Are you saying that the war between humans and Zilani is being manipulated by this third group? Yes, Lyra said, her eyes flashing bright red. The Korthek want us to weaken each other. Then they will come and finish what is left. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. If this was true, then everything he had been told about the conflict was wrong. Humans and Zilani were not really enemies at all. They were both being used by a common enemy. How do you know this? Jake asked. I have seen their ships, Lyra said. I have seen what they do to planets they conquer. Nothing lives, nothing grows. They turn everything into energy for their machines. Jake stood up and walked to the window. The peaceful landscape of Kepler 438b stretched out before him, but now it seemed fragile and threatened. If this is true, then we need to warn people. Both humans and Zelani. Who would believe us? Lyra asked. A human who helps the enemy and a Zelani who speaks for humans? They would think we are both traitors. Jake turned back to her. Maybe, but we have to try. If the Korthak are really planning to attack both our peoples, then we need to work together to stop them. Lyra's eyes changed to a soft green color. You would do this? You would risk being called a traitor by your own people to warn them? Jake looked at Lyra, thinking about her question. 3 days ago, he had been a simple geological surveyor, living a quiet life on a mining colony. Now he was talking about changing the course of an interstellar war. But when he looked at Lyra, he knew what he had to do. Yes, he said, I would do this, because it's the right thing to do. Lyra's eyes turned bright gold, and for the first time since she had awakened, she smiled. It was a beautiful smile that made her whole face light up. Then we will work together, she said, human and Zelani, to save both our peoples. Jake nodded, feeling a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. He had found an injured alien in a crashed ship, and in helping her, he had discovered something much more important than mineral deposits. He had found a partner in what might be the most important mission in the history of both species. Over the next few days, Jake and Lyra worked together to understand each other better. Jake had made a decision that could get him in serious trouble with the human authorities, but he believed it was the right thing to do. Instead of reporting Lyra's presence to the colony, he was going to help her repair her ship's communication system, so she could contact both the Zelani and the humans about the Korthak threat. Lyra was getting stronger each day. Her broken arm was healing well, and she could move around the research station without too much pain. Jake was amazed at how quickly she recovered. Zelani bodies seemed to heal faster than human ones. The silver-blue blood that had worried him, so much was now flowing normally through the clear tubes under her shimmering skin. On the 4th day, Jake and Lyra made their way back to the canyon where her ship had crashed. Jake carried a bag full of tools and spare parts from his research station. Lyra walked beside him, her eyes changing from yellow to green as she saw her ship again. Jake was learning to read her emotions through the color changes. Green seemed to mean sadness or worry. It looks worse than I remembered, Lyra said quietly as they approached the broken ship. Jake studied the damage. The ship's hull was cracked in several places, and the bioluminescent panels that had been flickering when he first found it were now completely dark. The hull damage is bad, but we're not trying to make it fly again. We just need to get the communication system working. They climbed through the hole in the ship's side. Inside, Jake was struck again by how different everything was from human technology. The walls seemed to be alive, covered with what looked like veins and nerves. Made of some kind of organic material? Many of these living circuits were dark now, but some still pulsed with faint light. How does this work? Jake asked, running his fingers along one of the wall circuits. It is grown, not built, Lyra explained. We use living technology. The ship's systems are connected to biological computers that think and adapt. But they need energy to survive, and much of that energy was lost in the crash. Jake pulled out his scanner and began studying the ship's systems. The readings were unlike anything he had ever seen. There were energy patterns that seemed to move and change like living things. Can you show me where the communication system is? Lyra led him to what had been the pilot's area. There was a smooth, curved surface that Jake guessed was some kind of control panel, but it was completely dark. Lyra placed her hand on the surface and spoke in her musical language. Nothing happened. It needs power, she said, her eyes turning a frustrated orange color. The ship's main power source was damaged in the crash. Jake thought for a moment. What if we used human power sources? I have some portable generators back at the station. Human. Electricity might damage the biological systems, Lyra said doubtfully. What if we modified it somehow, made it more compatible? Jake was already thinking about how to solve the problem. This was the kind of challenge he enjoyed, figuring out how to make different systems work together. They spent the rest of the day studying the ship's power systems. Jake used his scanner to map the energy pathways while Lyra explained how the biological components worked. It was like trying to understand a living creature rather than a machine. Your people are good at this, Lyra said as she watched Jake work. You see problems and find solutions quickly. We're good at making things work, Jake said, adjusting his scanner settings. Sometimes we're not so good at understanding why things don't work in the first place. They worked together for hours, and Jake was surprised at how well they collaborated. Lyra's understanding of biological systems complemented his knowledge of human engineering. She could explain what the ship's systems were supposed to do, while he could figure out how to make them do it with the resources they had. As the sun began to set, Jake made a breakthrough. He found a way to use his portable power generator to charge the ship's biological batteries without damaging them. The key was to filter the electrical current through a series of resistors and capacitors that would make it more like the gentle, bioelectric energy the ship's systems expected. I think this might work, Jake said, connecting his generator to the ship's power system, but we'll need to be careful. Too much power too fast could kill the biological components. Lyra nodded and placed her hands on the control panel. I will monitor the systems and tell you if anything goes wrong. Jake slowly increased the power output from his generator. At first, nothing happened. Then, gradually, some of the wall circuits began to glow with faint light. The patterns of light moved slowly, like blood flowing through veins. It's working, Lyra said, her eyes bright with excitement. They had turned a brilliant gold color that Jake had learned meant happiness or success. More systems came online as Jake continued to feed power into the ship. The control panel under Lyra's hands began to glow, and symbols appeared on its surface. Lyra spoke in her own language, and the symbols changed in response. The communication system is responding, she said, but it will take time to fully charge. Maybe another day or two, Jake nodded. That's okay. We have time. As they worked, Jake and Lyra talked about their lives and their peoples. Jake learned that Lyra was a scientist as well as a scout. She studied other species and their technologies, trying to understand how different forms of life developed. She was fascinated by human engineering and the way humans solved problems. Your people build everything from pieces, she said. You take simple things and put them together to make complex things. My people grow everything as complete systems. Both ways work, but they are very different. Jake was equally fascinated by Zilani culture. What is your homeworld like? Lyra's eyes turned a soft blue color that Jake had learned meant nostalgia or longing. It is beautiful. The cities are grown from living trees that reach into the sky. The buildings change color with the seasons, and the streets flow like rivers. Everything is connected. Everything is alive. It sounds amazing, Jake said honestly. I would like to see it someday, and I would like to see Earth, Lyra said. I have studied human broadcasts and learned about your music and art. You create beauty from chaos. That is a gift. Jake smiled. Maybe when this is all over, we can visit each other's worlds. If there are still worlds to visit, Lyra said quietly. Her eyes had turned purple, the color of worry and fear. Jake knew what she meant. The Korthik threat was always in the back of their minds. Everything they were doing was based on the hope that they could warn their peoples in time to prevent a catastrophe. On the second day, as they continued working on the ship, Jake shared some of his food with Lyra. She was curious about human food, and Jake was surprised to find that she could eat most of it without any problems. She particularly liked the coffee Jake made each morning, though she said it was very different from Zilani beverages. What do your people drink? Jake asked. We have teas made from flowers that grow in the light of our sun, Lyra said. They help us think clearly and feel peaceful. And we have juices from fruits that change flavor based on our emotions. Jake found this fascinating. Your whole culture is based on living things, isn't it? Yes, Lyra said. We believe that life is the most beautiful and complex thing in the universe. Technology should enhance life, not replace it. That's a good philosophy, Jake said. Humans sometimes forget that we're part of nature, too. As they worked and talked, Jake began to understand that the differences between humans and Zelani were not as important as the similarities. Both species valued knowledge, beauty, and the safety of their families. Both had hopes and fears about the future. Both wanted to live in peace and grow as civilizations. The communication system was finally ready on the evening of the second day. The control panel glowed with steady light, and the symbols on its surface were clear and bright. Lyra placed her hands on the panel and began to speak in her musical language. I am contacting both the Zelani Collective and the Human Colonial Defense Force, she said to Jake. This message will change everything. Jake stood beside her, watching the alien symbols dance across the control panel. He thought about how much his life had changed in just a few days. A week ago, he had been a lonely surveyor looking for mineral deposits. Now he was helping to prevent a war between civilizations. Are you ready for this? Lyra asked, her eyes meeting his. Jake nodded. Let's do it. Lyra began to transmit her message to both fleets, warning them about the Korthic threat and calling for peace between humans and Zelani. As her voice filled the ship with its musical tones, Jake realized that there was no going back now. Whatever happened next. He and Lyra had started something that would affect the fate of two civilizations. He just hoped they were not too late. The response to Lyra's message came faster than either Jake or Lyra had expected. Within hours of sending their warning about the Korthic threat, both human and Zelani forces were trying to contact them. The communication panel in Lyra's ship buzzed with incoming messages, and Jake's personal communicator, which he had kept turned off for days, began beeping urgently. Jake looked at his communicator with worry. They've found us. Lyra's eyes turned a deep purple as she listened to the messages coming through her ship's system. The Zelani High Command is calling me a traitor. They think I have been captured and brainwashed by humans. Jake activated his communicator and immediately heard the angry voice of Colony Administrator Frank Davis. Morrison! Where the hell have you been? We've been looking for you for 3 days. Report to headquarters immediately. What do we tell them? Jake asked Lyra. The truth, Lyra said, though her eyes remained purple with worry. It is the only way. Jake took a deep breath and spoke into his communicator. Administrator Davis, I need to speak with you and the military commander. I have information about a threat to the colony. A serious threat. You have information? Morrison, you're a rock hunter, not an intelligence officer. Get back here now. Sir, please listen to me. There are hostile alien ships approaching our system, ships that are not Zelani. We have maybe 2 or 3 days before they arrive. There was silence on the communicator for a long moment. Then Davis spoke again, his voice more serious. Morrison, how do you know this? What kind of ships? Jake looked at Lyra, who nodded encouragingly. Sir, I found a crashed Zelani ship. The pilot is alive and she has information about an alien race called the Korthak. They'd been manipulating both humans and Zelani into fighting each other while they prepared to attack both our species. Another long silence. Then a different voice came through the communicator. It was Commander Helen Carter, the military leader of the colony. Morrison, are you saying you have contact with a live alien? Yes, ma'am. She's been helping me understand the real threat we're facing. Morrison, listen to me very carefully. You are to remain exactly where you are. Do not move. Do not do anything. A security team is coming to get you. Do you understand? Jake looked at Lyra, whose eyes had turned bright red with alarm. Through her ship's communication system, they could both hear Zelani voices speaking rapidly in their musical language. Lyra was translating quickly for Jake. They are sending ships to capture me, she said. They think you have made me a prisoner. They do not believe the warning about the Korthak. Jake made a quick decision. Commander Carter, you need to listen. To me, both our species are in danger. The Zilani pilot has scan data showing massive Korthik ships approaching the system. If we fight each other instead of working together, we will all die. Morrison, you are way out of line here. You should have reported this immediately instead of playing alien diplomat. There wasn't time, Jake said, his frustration growing. She was dying when I found her. I had to help her first. Commander Carter's voice was cold and professional. Stay where you are, Morrison. That's an order. Jake turned off his communicator and looked at Lyra. They're not listening. Lyra was still monitoring the Zilani communications. My people are not listening either. Both sides are sending ships, but they are coming to fight each other, not to prepare for the Korthik. Jake walked to the opening of the ship and looked up at the sky. Somewhere up there, human and Zilani ships were probably already moving toward each other, ready for battle. And somewhere beyond that, according to Lyra, the real enemy was approaching. How long do we have before the Korthik arrive? Jake asked. Lyra worked at her control panel, bringing up the scan data she had gathered before her ship crashed. Based on their speed when I last saw them, perhaps 2 days, maybe less. And how long before human and Zilani ships get here? The human ships from your colony will arrive in maybe 6 hours. The Zilani response fleet will take longer, perhaps 12 hours. But there are Zilani scout ships already in this system. They could be here much sooner, Jake thought quickly. The timing was all wrong. Human and Zilani forces would meet and start fighting long before the Korthik arrived. By the time the real enemy showed up, both sides would be weakened from fighting each other. We need to do something, Jake said. We can't just sit here and watch both our peoples destroy each other. Lyra's eyes shifted from purple to orange as she considered their options. What can we do? We are just 2 people. They will not listen. To us. Jake looked around the inside of Lyra's ship, thinking. Then an idea began to form in his mind. What if we could prove the Korthik threat is real? What if we could show them the enemy ships? The Korthik ships are still too far away for human or Zilani sensors to detect, Lyra said. But your ship has better sensors, doesn't it? Long-range scanners that can see farther than ours? Lyra nodded slowly. Yes, but the scanning system requires much more power than we have been able to generate. Jake was already moving toward his equipment. What if we used all the power from my generators, everything I have? It might work, Lyra said, her eyes turning yellow with interest. But it would use up all your power. Your research station would go dark. That doesn't matter, Jake said. If we can get clear scan data showing the Korthik ships, we can transmit it to both fleets. They'll have to believe the evidence. They worked quickly to connect all of Jake's portable generators to Lyra's ship. It took every power cell and battery Jake had brought with him, plus the main generator from his research station. Lyra guided him through the connections, making sure the biological systems could handle the massive power input. This is dangerous, Lyra warned as they prepared to activate the scanners. If we push the systems too hard, we could damage them permanently. It's a risk we have to take, Jake said. Ready? Lyra placed her hands on the control panel and began activating the ship's long-range sensors. The lights inside the ship grew brighter as more power flowed through the biological circuits. The walls began to pulse with energy, and Jake could feel a vibration running through the ship. Scanning, Lyra said, her voice tense with concentration. Looking for Korthik energy signatures? For several minutes, nothing happened. Then Lyra's eyes suddenly turned bright white, a color Jake had never seen before. Found them, she whispered, on the control panel. Images began to appear. Jake couldn't understand the alien symbols, but he could see what looked like ship outlines. Lots of them. How many? Jake asked. Lyra's eyes remained white as she studied the data. More than I expected. Much more. This is not just an attack fleet. This is an invasion force. Can you get clear images? Something both humans and Zilani will recognize as real? Lyra worked at the controls, focusing the scanners and recording everything they detected. Yes, I am getting clear scan data. Energy. Signatures, ship configurations, movement patterns. This will prove the threat is real. But as they worked, Jake's communicator began beeping again. This time it was an emergency signal. Morrison! Commander Carter's voice was urgent. We have Zilani ships approaching the colony. They're not responding to our communications. Oh. Civilian personnel are ordered to take shelter immediately. Jake looked at Lyra, whose eyes had turned red with alarm. They're already here? Human and Zilani ships are about to start shooting at each other. Lyra quickly finished recording the scan data. I have everything we need. But how do we get it to them before they start fighting? Jake had an idea. Can your ship transmit on both human and Zilani frequencies at the same time? Yes, but they might not listen to the message. They'll listen if we broadcast it on all emergency channels. Military commanders pay attention to emergency broadcasts, especially during a crisis. They work together to prepare the transmission. Lyra would speak in both languages, explaining what the scan data showed. Jake would add his voice as a human witness, confirming that the threat was real and that both species needed to work. Together, as they prepared to broadcast, Jake could hear explosions in the distance. The battle between human and Zilani forces had begun. They were running out of time. Ready? Lyra asked, her hands positioned over the transmission controls. Jake nodded. Let's do this. Lyra began broadcasting on all frequencies, human and Zilani. Her musical voice filled the air as she spoke in her own language, then switched to English for the human listeners. Jake added his confirmation, describing what he had seen and learned about the Korthik threat, but even as they transmitted their warning, the sounds of battle grew louder. Laser fire lit up the sky, and Jake could see explosions in the distance where ships were fighting and dying. I don't think they're listening, Jake said, watching the battle continue. Lyra's eyes turned a deep blue with sadness. We may be too late. Then suddenly the fighting stopped. The explosions ceased, and the laser fire ended. An eerie quiet fell over the landscape. Jake and Lyra looked at each other with hope and fear. Had their message gotten through? Or was the silence something worse? Jake's communicator crackled to life. Morrison, this is Admiral Kate Sullivan of the Colonial Defense Force. We've received your transmission. We're calling for an immediate ceasefire to evaluate this new information. Lyra's ship received a similar message in the Zilani language. Her eyes turned yellow as she listened. The meeting between Admiral Kate Sullivan and High Commander Zathara took place on neutral ground in the main hall of the human colony. Jake and Lyra stood together at the front of the room, facing the two most powerful military leaders in the system. Behind Admiral Sullivan stood a group of human officers in dark blue uniforms. Behind High Commander Zathara stood several Zilani warriors whose skin shimmered with patterns of light that Jake was beginning to understand showed their emotions. Jake had never been in a room with so many important people before. A week ago, he would have been terrified. But after everything he had been through with Lyra, he felt calm and determined. They had the truth on their side, and that gave him strength. Admiral Sullivan was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. She looked at Jake with a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. Surveyor Morrison, you have caused quite a situation here. Harboring an enemy alien, interfering with military operations, failing to report first contact. Under normal circumstances, you would be facing court-martial. High Commander Zathara was even taller than Admiral Sullivan, with the graceful build. That seemed common to all Zilani. Her skin showed patterns of blue and silver light, and her large eyes were focused intently on Lyra. When she spoke, her voice had the same musical quality as Lyra's, but with a tone of authority that made everyone listen. Scout Lyra, the High Commander said in English, you have also violated protocols. Sharing classified information with an enemy species, cooperating with human forces, abandoning your mission parameters. These are serious charges. Lyra's eyes flashed red for a moment, then settled into a steady gold color. High Commander, with respect, I have not abandoned my mission. My mission was to gather intelligence about threats to our people. The greatest threat is not humanity, it is the Korthik. Jake stepped forward. Admiral, High Commander, we don't have time for accusations. The scan data shows Korthik ships will arrive in less than 18 hours. If we're going to survive, we need to work together right now. Admiral Sullivan looked at the data displays that Lyra had set up around the room. The images showed the approaching Korthak fleet in detail. There were hundreds of ships, far more than the combined human and Zilani forces in the system. These ship designs are unlike anything in our databases, Admiral Sullivan said. The energy signatures are enormous. Just one of their large ships puts out more power than our entire fleet. High Commander Zethara was studying the same data. We have legends about ships like these. Ancient stories of destroyers that consumed. Whole star systems, we thought they were myths. They're not myths, Lyra said quietly. I have seen what they do to planets they conquer. Nothing survives. They strip away everything that lives and turn it into energy for their machines. Jake watched the faces of the military officers around the room. He could see fear in their expressions, but also determination. These were people who had dedicated their lives to protecting others. Now they faced the greatest threat either species had ever encountered. What are our options? Admiral Sullivan asked. Commander Helen Carter, the colony's military leader, spoke up. Our combined fleets have maybe 60 ships total. The Korthak have over 300. In a straight fight, we don't stand a chance. Fighting them directly would be suicide, High Commander Zethara agreed. But perhaps there are other ways to resist them. Lyra moved to the center of the room. I have been studying Korthak tactics since my people first encountered them. They are very powerful, but they are not smart in the way humans and Zilani are smart. They think in simple patterns. They expect enemies to fight in predictable ways. Jake felt an idea forming in his mind. What if we didn't fight them the way they expect? What if we used our differences as an advantage instead of a weakness? Admiral Sullivan looked at him with interest. Explain. Human tactics are direct and aggressive, Jake said, thinking out loud. We hit hard and fast, using overwhelming force. Zilani tactics are more subtle and flexible, using advanced technology and careful planning. The Korthak have probably never faced an enemy that combines both approaches. High Commander Zethara's skin patterns shifted to show approval. The human is correct. Separately, our forces would fail. But together, we might be able to confuse and outmaneuver them. It's still a huge risk, Admiral Sullivan said. We're talking about betting everything on a strategy we've never tried, against an enemy we know nothing about. Lyra's eyes turned bright gold. There's something else. The Korthak ships are powerful, but they have a weakness. Their biomechanical systems need time to adapt to new threats. If we can hit them with attacks they don't expect, quickly and from multiple directions, we might be able to damage them before they can adapt. Jake looked around the room at all the human and Zilani faces. We have something else the Korthak don't expect. We have cooperation. They've been trying to make us fight each other because they think we can't work together. Let's prove them wrong. The next 18 hours were the busiest of Jake's life. The human and Zilani forces worked together to prepare their defenses, sharing technology and tactics for the first time in their history. Jake found himself acting as a translator and coordinator, helping human engineers understand Zilani biotechnology and showing Zilani scientists how human weapon systems worked. The plan they developed was complex but elegant. The human ships would make direct attacks on the largest Korthak vessels, using their heavy weapons to draw attention and force the enemy to focus their defenses. At the same time, Zilani ships would use their advanced stealth technology to attack the smaller Korthak ships from unexpected angles. The goal was not to destroy the entire enemy fleet, but to damage enough ships to force them to retreat. Jake and Lyra worked together to coordinate communications between the two fleets. They set up a system where Jake could relay human tactical information to Lyra, who would translate it for the Zilani commanders. It was not perfect, but it was better than trying to fight two separate battles. When the Korthak fleet finally arrived, it was even more terrifying than the scan data had suggested. The enemy ships were enormous, dark things that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved through space like living creatures, flowing and changing formation in ways that hurt to watch, The battle began at the edge of the star system, far from the colony planet. Jake and Lyra watched from the colony's command center, monitoring communications and helping coordinate the combined defense. On the main screen, they could see the flashes of weapon fire as Human and Zelani ships engaged the Korthic fleet. At first, the plan seemed to be working. The human ships drew the attention of the large Korthic vessels, while the Zelani ships struck at smaller targets. Several enemy ships were damaged or destroyed in the opening minutes of the battle, but the Korthic adapted quickly. Their ships began moving in new patterns, countering the Human and Zelani tactics. The battle turned into a desperate struggle, with both sides taking heavy losses. "We're losing too many ships," Admiral Sullivan reported over the communication link. "The Korthic are learning our patterns faster than we expected." Jake watched the battle display, seeing the red dots that represented destroyed Human and Zelani ships. So many people were dying, and it might all be for nothing. Then Lyra grabbed his arm. "Jake, I have an idea. What if we don't just coordinate our attacks? What if we actually combine them?" "What do you mean?" "Human weapons are powerful, but simple. Zelani weapons are sophisticated, but limited. But what if we link them together? Used human power sources to boost Zelani weapons, or use Zelani targeting systems to guide human missiles?" Jake felt a surge of excitement. It might work. But how do we set it up in the middle of a battle? Lyra was already working at her controls. "We can use the communication link. If Human and Zelani ships move close together, they can share power and targeting data directly." It was a desperate gamble, but it worked. Human and Zelani ships began forming mixed squadrons, sharing their technologies in real time. The results were spectacular. Human missiles guided by Zelani biocomputers struck with impossible accuracy. Zelani energy weapons powered by human reactors hit with devastating force. The Korthic fleet, faced with weapons they had never seen before, began to falter. Their biomechanical systems could not adapt quickly enough to counter the new combined attacks. Ship after ship was destroyed or crippled. Finally, after hours of battle, the surviving Korthic ships began to retreat. They had lost nearly half their fleet, and the rest were too damaged to continue the assault. As the enemy fleet disappeared into the darkness between stars, a cheer went up in the command center. Humans and Zelani celebrated together, their former enemies now their closest allies. Jake and Lyra stood together at the center of it all, watching as Admiral Sullivan and High Commander Zathara shook hands for the first time. Around them, Human and Zelani officers were already making plans for shared technology projects and joint defense agreements. "We did it," Jake said quietly. Lyra's eyes were shining with warm gold light. "No, Jake, you did it. When you found me injured and alone, you chose to help instead of fear. That choice changed everything." Jake looked around at the celebration, at Humans and Zelani working together as friends instead of enemies. "I just did what felt right."